Happy Halloween. This is Jason Hedrick. I'm the director of theater at John A. Logan College, and we are bringing you more spooky stories and songs today where we're introducing some of the folks who make our theater and music department happen and tell some spooky stories, of course. Today, we have a very special guest, Erin Elliott. I'm going to talk a little bit to her and about her in just a second. But I did want to mention that here at John A. Logan College, even though we are not conducting our acting courses this semester, we do offer courses in acting, two levels, Fundamentals of Acting 1 and Fundamentals of Acting 2. We also have a course in Introduction to Theater, and this semester online are doing a course in Play Analysis for Production. In the future, I'm really looking forward to a new course that we're going to be having here called A Performance of Literature, and I think some of what we're going to hear today would probably fall into that category or would be good material to create a kind of performance of literature staging in a course like that. So if you're interested in any of those, please come out to John A. Logan and ask an advisor or find me and ask me about any of those courses. I also teach courses in public speaking, and this semester, right before Halloween happens, I had a very special occasion of Erin Elliott doing a speech about some local ghost stories, and I thought, ooh, that's the perfect opportunity to tell some of these stories around Halloween and let people know that we're still here, even though we can't have a public performance this semester. And so today, I want to introduce Erin Elliott. Hello, Erin.
Hi, Jason.
Hello. Thank you for coming in. And Erin, I know the first time that I think I remember seeing you was, this is maybe December of 2018. We were doing a Christmas show. Mm-hmm. I want to say you were doing like Andrew Sisters.
Yes, we did Bugle Boy. We did the Boogie Woogie Bugle.
I remember that, and I remember thinking, what a singer. and then was fortunate enough in the spring 2019 to have you in our production of Barnum, about P.T. Barnum. Particularly remember you singing the number Black and White as a soloist in that number. That was a song my partner and Jen and I sang Black and White around the house for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks afterwards. So that one's always with me. And thanks for being a part of our music and theater department here. And but today we're here to not have you sing, but to tell a spooky story, one that I like particularly. Now, in the speech that you gave in class, you touched on a couple of other local scary stories. Can you tell us really briefly what those were?
Yeah, of course. So one of the ones I covered is probably one a lot of people in our area are more familiar with, which is the Murfreesboro Big Muddy Monster.
Oh, yeah.
And that was one that most of the sightings were back in the 1970s, where it was seen around, and it's kind of a Bigfoot-adjacent creature.
The Southern Illinois Bigfoot, yeah.
Our kind of version of Bigfoot was like a two-legged, like 6+ feet, white beast that smelled awful.
Right.
According to the people who saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried to track it down a couple different times, found traces of it out by a barn in the middle of the woods in some places, but they never really traced it anywhere in particular.
Yeah.
And then another one that I covered was the Enfield Horror, which was another 1970s story where a farmer heard something out in his area and went outside to check it out and saw a creature that he described as a three-legged creature with two arms and eyes that were so huge that the moon reflected in them like flashlights almost. And so he shot at it to try and scare it off and called the cops, and they came out and tried to track it, and all they could find were prints that looked almost like dog prints, but it had 6 toes. And they tried to trace it, but they lost the tracks eventually, and there were a few more sightings around that area over the years, but eventually it just kind of faded away, and there haven't been any more reports since the late 1970s.
Mm-hmm. But every year about this time, people start talking about the Enfield horror and the Big Muddy Monster, of course. These poor creatures are getting shot at all over the place around here, I bet. But there's another creature that you want to tell us about a little bit more at length, and That is one that I had never heard of until your speech, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you in. And which are often referred to as the giant birds in a small town in Illinois, or the thunderbirds. Now, why don't you go ahead and tell us about them?
So the thunderbird is, like most mythology and folklore, mention giant birds in some senses. So we have like the phoenix, griffins, the stymphalian birds from Greek mythology, and this thunderbird is more unique to the United States and surrounding areas, but particularly native folklore. And most tribes that had stories about thunderbirds described them as almost protectors that kept track of everything in their area, warned away intruders, and held religious significance to many tribes. And one of those that's most local is the Cahokia tribe, out by the Cahokia Mounds that we have out there near us. And they held very high respect for them and saw them as protectors that guarded their territory, basically, and described them as huge birds with a wingspan of 12 to 15 feet that were big enough that they could carry away large mammals in their talons, just swoop down and pick them up and carry them off with no effort, basically.
Or children.
Or children. And some of the cliff faces actually out in Alton have cliff paintings of them, and the most famous is probably the Piazza bird, and that's on the limestone cliffs out in Alton. And that was discovered by Jacques Marquette back in 1673, and it's been kept up since then by dedicated people who go up and maintain it and take care of it and repaint it based off of those original sketches. But I wanted to touch on one of the most recent stories of the Thunderbird, and that's from 1977, from the Lowe family in Lawndale, Illinois. And Ruth Lowe, the mother of the family, was inside after dinner one night, just cleaning up, and her kids were outside in the yard playing together when she heard her 10-year-old son Marlon screaming. And it wasn't just the kind of scream that you hear when kids are playing around with each other and teasing and roughhousing. It was one where she knew he was terrified or hurt. And so she ran outside immediately, only to see her son being circled by these two gigantic birds that she described as 4.5 feet probably from beak to tip of the tail, all black with a white band around their necks, wingspan of probably 8+ feet. And she immediately started running towards them, trying to shoo them away from her son, but before she could reach him, one of them swooped down and managed to grab him by the back of his shirt and lifted him off the ground and made it about 30 feet before dropping him. And so she picked him up and checked over, make sure he wasn't hurt, and immediately went to the police station. Well, they were laughed away, basically, and shooed off and brushed off, and told, why on earth would you come to us with this? That can't even be real. We don't have anything like that in the area. What is wrong with you, basically? And for a long time after that, the community kept it up as a running joke of, oh, what's wrong with the Lowe's telling this story? This can't even be possible. Enough to where the son was nicknamed Bird Boy at school. And that kind of followed him through his educational career. But that's one of the most interesting stories I was able to find recently of this Thunderbird.
Interesting. And it's such a scary story, because people orient to birds differently, and of course you find them in all sorts of horror stories. How about you? Are you particularly scared of birds?
I have a healthy respect of them.
Yes.
I like smaller birds.
That's wise.
And I was very, very interested in owls and turkey vultures and that kind of thing as a kid. I thought they were fascinating, but from a distance.
Right.
If I had one anywhere near me, I'd be a little more cautious.
Growing up, my mother was a big movie fan, and occasionally, of course, around this time of year, horror movies. One of the scariest movies to her growing up was Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, and she was a little edgy around birds all the time, and there's something inherent there that still gets to people, and of course runs throughout all our folklore. Thank you so much for sharing this story with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you being here, and thank you for listening. Once again, this is Jason Hedrick with Erin Elliott at John A. Logan College, where we appreciate your support of the arts, music, and theater. Thanks for listening.